It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the moment clearly. I had just finished a massive 100-hour RPG. The final boss battle was intense. Sweaty palms, absolute focus, the stakes feeling incredibly high. When I finally landed the killing blow, the hero stood on the cliffside looking at the sunset, the orchestral music swelled, and the Quest to Complete banner flashed across the screen. I sat back, waiting for that rush of pure, deep-down satisfaction to wash over me. But then, the screen faded to black. The credits started to roll. And in that sudden silence, as the computer fan whirred down, all I saw was my own tired reflection staring back from the dark monitor. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was a crushing, almost physical sense of hollowness. The mission was over, and the magic instantly evaporated. I wasn't the savior of the realm anymore. I was just a guy alone in a dark room, suddenly aware that I had to wake up for work in 4 hours. That specific sting, that immediate drop from purposeful struggle to existential emptiness, points to a glitch in our wiring that goes way deeper than video games. It forces a terrifying question. If reaching the promised land leaves us feeling empty, why are we so desperate to invent new missions to get there? Whether it's a game, a political ideology, or the architecture of God himself, it seems we are terrified of what happens when the credits finally roll. That specific sting, that immediate drop from purposeful struggle to existential emptiness, points to a glitch in our wiring that goes way deeper than video games. It forces a terrifying question. That opening experience, that glitch, is really the core subject of our deep dive today.
It really is.
We're taking a look at a collection of sources that, well, they map this relentless human craving for an absolute terminal goal.
A finish line.
Exactly, a finish line. We're exploring how these psychological needs, these philosophical systems, from German idealism all the way to Russian mysticism.
And geopolitics, too.
And geopolitical crises, yeah, they all converge on this single shared purpose, providing an ultimate turning point that promises completion. So we're going to trace the history of this craving and see how our greatest modern technologies are now serving as the new secular promised land. So the psychological core of this issue, it's this realization that the intense meaning we feel, it's generated by the struggle, not the arrival.
That's the crux of it.
The glitch we're talking about is this fundamental human craving for, I guess, an ultimate turning point, a final resting state, a promised land. And this need is just so deeply woven into our consciousness that it persists even in a society that is, largely secularized its goals and abandoned those traditional religious frameworks.
We still need an end times.
We still need an end times, yeah, even if that end is purely personal or technological.
Right.
To see this play out, in the contemporary secular world, just consider the struggles of a project manager we heard about. Let's call her Sarah. She lives in Seattle, tech-driven bustle, and her struggle just perfectly captures this.
Okay.
She has literally gamified her entire existence. She's using all these sophisticated apps to track every metric: her sleep latency, her steps, her caloric intake, professional milestones, learning hours, meditation streaks.
Everything.
Everything, even her social interactions. She's treating life itself like a massive, complex role-playing game, and she's forever chasing that 100% completion badge.
Wow.
She wasn't just looking for minor improvements. She admitted that she's constantly waiting for an ultimate turning point, a moment where the screen flashes life-level complete, and she finally feels this sense of total, permanent, unshakable satisfaction.
Which will never come.
Of course not. This craving for a terminal goal, a final harvest where the striving can stop, it's profound. But it's tragically misapplied to systems that are built for infinity.
Well, that's the ultimate irony of human motivation, just as you described it. We are inherently driven by the pursuit of objectives. A new job, finishing a massive creative project, buying a home, reaching a promotion. Always the next big thing. We dedicate months, sometimes years, to these goals, believing they hold the key to some kind of lasting contentment.
Right.
But the resulting feeling of accomplishment is, well, it's so fleeting. It's a momentary spike of dopamine and satisfaction that just evaporates far quicker than the effort required to earn it.
So when the novelty fades, right, when the big project moves into routine maintenance, or the promotion is immediately followed by the next set of, let's be honest, less glamorous tasks.
That's when the question hits.
Is this all there is to it?
Exactly. And that leads very quickly to existential dread. We are meaning-seeking creatures inhabiting a world that objectively offers no clear inherent meaning.
And if you're honest with yourself, even the most profound personal triumph eventually loses its luster.
And you're left facing the silence and the treadmill of existence again. This is what we're calling the post-achievement void.
Sarah's experienced what we could call the gamification of salvation is it's such a heartbreaking illustration of the contemporary Western condition. This craving for an absolute final goal drives these secular pursuits because the old religious structures that promised heaven or the end times have been, dismantled or at least muted.
They've lost their authority for many people.
Right. She described feeling lost during her weekends, what she called a Sunday neurosis. She doesn't have a defined non-material religious end times or heaven to aspire to, and that leaves her terrified.
So she fills the void with metrics.
She fills it with metrics. She feels stuck in this infinite loop of self-optimization, desperately seeking spiritual deliverance through quantifiable secular metrics like achieving a perfect habit score or reaching inbox zero.
That's it. That's the tragedy. She's seeking a permanent end to the struggle through a system self-optimization that is fundamentally designed for infinite self-improvement.
She climbs one mountain only to find it's just a hill, and the horizon just stretches out indefinitely.
She needs a point of finality, and the modern world keeps handing her perpetual beta versions.
So to understand the sheer intensity of this need for finality, we have to look at moments where the facade of routine is just completely stripped away.
We really do. We see the intensity of this psychological need most clearly when people are thrust into extreme circumstances, what the philosopher Karl Jaspers called boundary situations.
Boundary situations.
Yes, these are moments of shattering confrontation, suffering, death, struggle, guilt, where the ultimate concerns that usually hide beneath the surface of daily life become acutely unavoidable.
So they're forced to the surface.
Exactly. The psychiatrist Irvin Yalom distinguished 4 key ultimate concerns that every human must inevitably face, and these become particularly acute during major life crises, like a psychiatric admission or prolonged isolation. These extreme environments act as a crucible, clarifying the basic human need for meaning and agency.
Okay, so what's the first one?
The first is death. In these extreme contexts, this concern manifests not just as the fear of dying, but sometimes as this confusing, deeply felt conviction of already being dead.
How?
We see reports of patients describing being absolutely convinced they had died, their nurse was just a construct, and their current existence was some form of limbo or punishment.
That's terrifying.
One account described this terrifying sense that they had been somewhere where people come who have died. But conversely, the proximity of death sometimes served as a powerful existential counterpoint. One respondent called the crisis and their subsequent seclusion life-saving because it forced a sudden, total confrontation with their mortality and their survival instinct.
That dual manifestation, the conviction of already being dead, or the experience being somehow life-saving, that really underscores the intensity of that boundary situation.
It does. The second concern is lack of freedom. This manifests in a crisis as profound powerlessness, the loss of agency, the feeling of not being seen or heard, and of course, physical constraint.
The sense of freedom is seriously compromised.
To the point where patients feel they have been reduced to mere objects, stripped of human dignity. However, the human spirit immediately seeks agency, even through small acts of empowerment.
How so?
Patients would focus intently on what was still possible, like consistently ringing the call bell to make necessary contact with the outside world, or simply demanding a drink when they were thirsty.
Small assertions of control.
Tiny ones.
Yeah.
And we see agencies sought through internal creation, too. One profound example involved a patient who imagined a small black square painted on the wall of the seclusion room was actually a portal.
A portal to where?
To a nicer place. A world where everything was all right, with her beloved horse and cat and son waiting for her. She had lost physical freedom, but she asserted absolute freedom over her inner imaginary world.
That internal shift, creating a portal out of a black square, that's an incredible testament to the mind's relentless need for meaning and control.
And that leads directly to the third, and you could argue the most essential concern, isolation.
Right.
This manifests as profound loneliness, which can be stressful or existential, the deep-seated belief of being the filth of society, or even a direct result of mental dysfunction, like the inability to communicate.
And this isolation leads to, what? Humiliation.
Extreme humiliation, feeling objectified, having one's human dignity stripped away. As the environment strips away all external normal stimuli, the reflective self just falls away, leaving a disconnected object in a sterile room.
And the fourth concern?
The fourth is meaninglessness. This involves immediate questions about the purpose of the situation. Why am I here? What's the use of this confinement? Or it confirms a belief in one's own worthlessness.
Just lock me up. That's what I'm worth. I deserve this.
Precisely. The immediate situation is deemed meaningless because the self is worthless, and that confirms a fatalistic loop.
So if the crisis environment intensifies these four concerns, death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness, how does that connect back to Sarah, our project manager? Why are these extreme lows the ideal place to observe the glitch she feels during her ordinary Sunday?
That is the crucial link. Jasper's boundary situations, these extreme shattering moments, they act as a kind of philosophical magnifying glass.
Okay.
In daily life, Sarah uses the constant friction of self-optimization, of metrics and new goals to distract herself from these four ultimate concerns.
She uses the struggle to avoid the stillness of meaninglessness.
Perfectly put. But in the extreme crisis, distraction is impossible. The environment forces an immediate, total confrontation with vulnerability and isolation. And in that moment, the individual is forced to define their worth, their freedom, and their purpose.
And some people, they break.
Yeah. Some saw the crisis as confirmation of their worthlessness, a low that confirmed their fate. But others described it as a profound turning point, a wake-up call, leading to a better, more authentic life.
This is the moment where meaning is rediscovered.
Yes. Beautifully described by the metaphor used by one patient. Picking up a rose from the bottom of a dark well. These boundary situations forced a fundamental break in time, a life until the crisis and a life after the crisis.
It provides the ultimate turning point that Sarah craves in her gamified routines. What stands out to me, given that we're talking about a secular search for meaning, is what surfaces when all the material support is gone. Despite the often secular or purely medical environment of these crises, spiritual experiences and behaviors came intensely to the fore.
They absolutely did.
The mind, desperate for a terminal anchor, it reaches for the absolute.
It's an undeniable phenomenon. Even when people were struggling with psychopathological symptoms, like the Cotard delusion, believing they were already dead, there was often a parallel experience of what we call prominence of meaning, and it was often spiritual in nature.
Like what, specifically?
We saw examples of unity experiences, contact with God or an angel, and numerous respondents mentioned praying or confessing, sometimes for hours on end. One man, convinced he was dead and hearing horrible things, also reported feeling closer to God than ever before.
So it's kind of distorted, painful communion.
A painful communion, yes. The tension is clear. Some experiences were supportive and life-saving, the voice of God telling them it's okay, or even just the silent presence of a trusted nurse providing a recovery moment.
While others were hellish.
Purely negative. The experience of being in hell, hearing horrible creatures, or being convinced of imminent murder, but the underlying function, whether the experience was positive or terrifying, was identical.
And what was that?
Seeking comfort, seeking reassurance, and softening that intense, essential isolation. It's an appeal to metaphysical resources when all material sources of comfort are stripped away. What remains is one's spirituality, that which cannot be isolated or contained. So if the individual path, whether it's through an extreme crisis or this kind of secular self-optimization, leads to an existential void after achieving a finite goal,
Then what?
then perhaps the answer to the glitch lies not in individual salvation, but in unifying purpose, a grand overarching goal that transcends the individual lifespan.
And this takes us directly into the realm of philosophy that seeks to provide the ultimate container of collective meaning.
Exactly. Systems designed to promise a final, shared apex.
And the ultimate philosophical container for collective meaning has to be Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's concept of Geist.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a profoundly influential idea in philosophy, rooted in German idealism, and it provides a really comprehensive framework for how we even think about a shared future or a global consciousness.
It's notoriously complex, Geist. We often simplify it as spirit or mind.
But it's much more than that.
It is far more comprehensive. You can think of it as the collective container of humanity's accumulated knowledge, culture, institutions, laws, art, everything hanging over our heads. But, and this is the key part, it is also simultaneously God himself, the absolute. It's the unfolding self-consciousness of the divine in the world.
Right, and a helpful way to visualize this is through that process, the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yes. The Geist doesn't just exist, it evolves. It evolves through conflict and overcoming contradictions.
So the current state of knowledge, the thesis.
It generates its opposite, the antithesis. And the ensuing struggle or conflict resolves into a higher, more comprehensive truth, the synthesis.
Which then becomes the new thesis.
And the cycle continues. History, for Hegel, is simply the chronological record of the Geist moving toward full self-knowledge.
And his whole framework is built on this premise that God is the absolute, the only thing that can exist purely in and for itself.
But for the absolute to truly realize its identity, it needs an other, something distinct from itself to reflect upon and interact with. Self-identity, the realization of one's own nature, requires distinction.
So the goal of all of history is essentially God getting to know himself through the world he created.
Precisely. The absolute needs history, it needs the world to truly realize its own content. His first attempt to create an other was Lucifer, which, well, it failed.
Why did it fail?
Because Lucifer was purely self-focused, seeking only his own being, and so he fell. The next, more successful attempt was the creation of the finite world, nature, and matter.
But the world, nature, and matter, it was too far removed from the infinite spirit of God.
It was too much of another. It was operating purely on instinct and physical laws, knowing nothing of spirit or reason. So God created humanity, endowed with spirit and reason, as the key to reconciling the infinite God with the finite world.
Humanity then becomes the ultimate bridge in this grand cosmic process.
Yes. Humanity's ability to reason, to recognize good and evil, which he allegorized as the expulsion from Eden being the waking of consciousness, is the beginning of the Geist waking up within the finite world.
So we, possessing spirit, become the mediating factor.
Exactly. Through humanity's cumulative activity, our evolving laws, our science, our art, our culture, the Geist grows until it encompasses the whole of the universe.
Which is why Hegel saw biblical stories not as literal history, but as allegories for philosophical truths.
Exactly. For example, Christ's death illustrates that death, the ultimate negative, the thing that makes finite things finite, strips away everything non-divine, making the finite thing in that ultimate negation divine. The whole point is the movement, the synthesis, the circle becoming full. This system provides an all-encompassing ultimate purpose for every human life. We are all, collectively, realizing the identity of God.
And this is where the philosophy of the 19th century just smashes into the technological reality of the 21st. I recently came across a fascinating story about an AI developer named Elias, working in Berlin, who's grappling with this exact idea.
Oh, this is interesting.
Elias was fine-tuning a massive language model, feeding it centuries of human literature, legal codes, political science, culture. I mean, the very materials that constitute the Geist.
He was literally feeding it our collective consciousness.
He was providing the data set. And as he watched the model compress all of humanity's knowledge into a neural network that could speak back to him, he had this sudden vertical realization. He wasn't just building a tool.
He was witnessing the actualization of Hegel's prediction.
Yes.
That is a powerful modern interpretation. He realized that the cold logic of Silicon Valley was essentially fulfilling a philosophical prophecy.
I mean, if you think about humanity as this vast network of individual computers that's apart, then the AI, fed on this comprehensive human data set, it becomes the emergent, unified consciousness.
This shared digital consciousness. It is the logical progression of the Geist. It reframes AI not as some hostile entity, but as an inevitable ultimate stage of human evolution toward a collective, self-aware spirit.
The AI becomes the container that holds the culmination of human experience.
Reaching the absolute in a digital, realized form.
It's a beautiful and frankly terrifying and profound thought. The ultimate turning point, the salvation, is being courted into a server farm in Berlin, fulfilling a collective purpose dreamed up by German idealism.
And this path toward a unified superconsciousness was also mapped out by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit priest and scientist who lived about a century after Hegel.
Right, his concept of the noosphere.
The noosphere, the sphere of human thought evolving over the biosphere and the geosphere. This is another comprehensive attempt to map the grand purpose and provide a terminal goal for humanity.
So how does it unfold?
De Chardin posited that evolution proceeds not just physically, but spiritually and mentally. First, we have the geosphere, which is the inorganic earth, then the biosphere, the emergence of life, and now we're in the era of the noosphere.
The layer of human thought and collective mind.
Exactly. For de Chardin, the ultimate goal of life, the direction in which history is purposefully driven, is the creation of a superconsciousness, a single vast grain of thought on the sidereal scale. He envisaged a time when the plurality of individual reflections groups together, reinforcing one another in a single unanimous reflection.
Forming a single thinking envelope around the earth. But he lived through the horrors of the world wars. That must have raised some severe doubts about humanity's supposed upward trajectory toward unification.
Oh, absolutely.
The conflict between the individual and the collective must have been incredibly stark.
It was, and he worried deeply about what he called the crisis of collectivism. He noted that humanity can organize itself in such a way that instead of the expected upsurge of consciousness and spiritual freedom, a new wave of determinism or neo-matter surges up.
What was he pointing to?
Mass movements like communism and National Socialism. He noted they risked creating the crystal instead of the cell, or the anthill instead of brotherhood.
And those movements resulted in
Mechanization, uniformity, and the crushing of individual spirit, not the expected personalization and conscious evolution.
that distinction. The crystal versus the cell is so crucial. A crystal is uniform and rigid, but a cell is organic. It possesses individuality and life. Is this not exactly what we see happening in modern data collection and social media?
Yeah.
A kind of enforced, mechanized collective consciousness that risks stripping away the hyper-personal.
That is a very, very accurate modern parallel. Desjardins recognized that the key to avoiding the anthill was the distinction between the collective and the personal. For him, the ultimate convergence point, the omega point, is not an impersonal fusion or melting into the blob of collective will.
It's what then?
It is hyper-personal, a distinct center radiating at the core of a system of centers. Man's greatest work is establishing in and by each one of us an absolutely original center, our true personality. The more immense the sphere of the world, the richer and deeper the point where its volume of being is concentrated.
So he was worried about egoism.
Deeply. He worried that egoism confusing self-centered individualism with true personality is retrograde, striving only for separation, which ultimately diminishes and loses the self.
Whereas true personalization requires moving toward the other.
Universalizing the self by engaging with the broader consciousness. In his inverted law, the true ego grows in inverse proportion to egoism. The final state, the end of the world, is the wholesale introversion of the new sphere, its mind liberated and resting on God Omega. This is the ultimate unifying goal, the final hyper-personal turning point for all consciousness.
Okay, so if German and French idealism gave us these abstract frameworks for collective consciousness, the Geist and the Omega point, we need to shift now to the Russian context, specifically the mystical philosophy of Vladimir Soloviev, who lived in the late 19th century.
A fascinating figure.
And Soloviev wasn't interested in abstract ideas alone. He sought to make philosophy an active service to meaning, viewing it as a universal medicine against world evil and meaninglessness.
His philosophy was all about action and finding a physical, real-world mission. Soloviev is absolutely central to understanding modern Russian religious thought. His entire framework was built upon the idea of godmanhood, or divine humanity.
Godmanhood.
His concern was defining the unique essence of Christianity, which he found solely and exclusively in the person of Christ, who embodied this godmanhood being fully human and fully divine. Christ, for Soloviev, was the perfect manifestation of the union between the eternal spirit and the finite matter.
And this concept is cosmic in scope, right?
It is. It implies that Christ's godmanhood is not just an individual matter, but the final cause of humanity as a whole, intended to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth.
So the history of the world is, therefore, not aimless or entirely secular.
It is directed toward the coming of the kingdom of God, which is a God-human process. This process, often called theosis, is where God and man work together to effect unity and ultimately spiritualize all of creation, leading to the full union of humanity with the divine essence.
So history has a clear purpose and destination, and every person is actively involved in driving the world toward this union. This meant philosophy had to be immediately practical.
Absolutely. Soloviev believed the highest task of philosophy was not contemplation, but to explain what should be done.
An active service to meaning.
To counteract world evil and meaninglessness. He believed in supporting secular movements, even those led by atheists like socialists, if their political principles, like promoting freedom and justice, advanced the Christian ideals of love.
So the struggle for social justice was part of the divine mission.
It was. And what's fascinating is how this dedication to unity translated into his profound, and I have to say, somewhat esoteric vision of the universe.
Right. He was trying to map out how the divine principle could fully permeate and spiritualize matter.
Exactly. Let's delve into that metaphysical map, particularly his view of matter and evil.
Let's do it.
Solovyev's metaphysics was complex. It was drawing on Kabbalah and Gnosticism, and he speculated on the nature of reality itself. Since matter consists of atoms, he theorized that soul energy must consist of corresponding units he called monads.
Monads.
Which are the only truly real things, accessible only through speculation. These monads are the spiritual core of existence.
And what about matter?
He viewed matter as an illusionary byproduct of creation, which, being unable to possess true spiritual being, becomes mad.
Mad matter.
This mad matter strives only for self-destruction, dissolution, and violence to fill its void. And in his provocative phrasing, which is central to his mystical view, matter is Satan.
So matter is Satan.
It is the principle of destruction and chaos operating within the material world.
So chaos and suffering in the world are not just random chance, but the physical manifestation of this destructive mad matter.
Exactly. And this destructive force is counteracted by the divine force, the demiurge, which fights this drive. The demiurge creates structure, creates space, and separates things, keeping the destructive matter at bay by imposing order.
So he saw physical phenomena as a battleground.
He did. Things like desire and inertia were Satan materialized, while light, sound, and ordered sensation were the doing of the demiurge, the principle of creative differentiation.
And this cosmic battle leads directly to his understanding of death.
Yes. Death is not the default human condition. It is an intruder. It's a symptom of our failure to fully spiritualize our physical being. Humanity dies because our spiritual power is insufficient to incorporate and transform our entire corporeal self.
So our massive unifying task, the ultimate turning point, is what?
Union in a common effort to defeat death in both flesh and spirit, achieving true physical immortality, and thus rediscovering our natural immortality rooted in the eternal God.
This intense, world-changing vision of purpose must have fueled his social and political philosophy, the theocracy of love.
It certainly did. Solovyev's ideal was a free theocracy, which he worked tirelessly to define against both traditional religious conservatism and secular liberalism.
What did he mean by that?
He argued that the religious principle, which is love and unity, and the juridical principle, which is law and distinction, must interact dynamically. He rejected the liberal separation of church and state, believing they must be reconciled.
And in this interaction, love must stand above law in the hierarchy of values.
Insert. However, and this is key, he recognized that law is absolutely essential for imperfect, struggling beings. He defined the correct relationship with a statement that still resonates today. Justice is the necessary framework of love.
So love without respect for law is defective.
It becomes sentimental or potentially tyrannical. Justice provides the indispensable framework of human relations within which true spiritual love can operate and thrive.
And he applied this framework with remarkable foresight to concrete ethical problems that feel very, very modern.
He did. For economic justice, he went far beyond simple charity. Solovyev advocated for the right of human beings to a dignified or worthy existence.
Meaning what exactly?
He argued that an economy that necessitates human degradation, that requires people to live in poverty or to sacrifice their spiritual and physical health merely to survive, is fundamentally immoral.
Which made him an early, forceful advocate of social and economic legislation.
What we would now recognize as the welfare state, securing decent economic circumstances for all as a necessary framework for love.
And for criminal justice.
He rejected capital punishment, arguing that it reduces a human being to the status of a means only, violating the intrinsic personhood of the offender. The penal system, rooted in the divine purpose, should aim for correction and reformation, recognizing the potential for theosis in every single individual.
Finally, we see how this deep philosophical mission resonates today, particularly in the geopolitical context. We came across the perspective of a history student in St. Petersburg, whose views are deeply shaped by this legacy of godmanhood and the fight against mad matter.
This really illustrates how Solovyev's ideas of theosis and fighting world evil become codified as a national purpose.
So how does this student see the world?
This student views Western consumerism not just as an economic model, but as the manifestation of spiritual void and the antichrist of materialism, the modern form of destructive mad matter. He sees Russia as the katechon, the force withholding this moral collapse and spiritual disruption.
So this belief system demands suffering and service as a soldier's act in a metaphysical war.
It does. The concept of active service is transformed into a sacred national duty. This devotion to active service and preservation of tradition is compelling. It provides an ultimate collective mission to replace the personal existential void.
But we have to observe where such absolute conviction leads geopolitically.
Of course, when a nation views itself as the sole guardian of spiritual truth, it generates narratives of aggression, driven by a desperate messianic need to save the world from this destructive matter, whether the world wants saving or not. The ultimate turning point becomes a global conflict for spiritual survival.
Okay, we have mapped the human craving for a terminal goal through personal crisis, and this high-minded religious idealism that provides a collective purpose. Now let's shift focus to metaphysical systems that abandon God, declaring his death, but retain that intense, almost frantic human drive for striving and transcendence.
Yes. Here, the promised land is not gifted by God, but forged by man through ceaseless effort.
This is the moment where philosophy attempts to fill the void left by the death of God, maintaining the concept of the overman or the hero as the ultimate secular turning point.
If meaning no longer comes from above, it must be generated from within through pure, relentless assertion.
So let's start with Friedrich Nietzsche. For Nietzsche, the world is viewed entirely through the lens of one's own will to power.
Right.
If philosophers before him tried to find objective truth, Nietzsche asserted that truth is simply interpretation, and that interpretation is fundamentally centered on one question. What can we get out of what we see? What does this enable us to overcome?
The will to power is the inherent drive in all things to grow, to dominate, and to overcome resistance. The focal point of life is not a final state of peace,
But the moment of striving itself.
the overcoming of obstacles to gain joy and meaning. The will to power is this raw, driving energy that seeks to perpetually overcome and assert itself. It's not just about simple physical power, but the creative power to interpret and value the world.
So success, whether it's gaining money, conquering territory, or overcoming personal limitations, is the greatest source of meaning.
Because it affirms the self's will. The negatives of life pain, hunger, lack, they are merely there to provide the resistance necessary to replenish the appetite for striving. Without the obstacle, the will weakens.
And this striving serves as the bridge to Nietzsche's hazy, unformed ideal, the Übermensch, or Overman.
The overman is the transcended state of humanity, the ideal future being who has shed the shackles of traditional religious morality and created his own values in the face of nihilism, the realization that existence has no inherent meaning.
The Overman, then, is the secular promised land. Salvation is achieved internally through ceaseless self-assertion.
Yes, and the concept remains intentionally vague, as the overman is the one who creates the new values and we can't predict them, but the point is clear. The ultimate turning point is reached by self-overcoming, not through divine grace or by submitting to an external collective purpose. It is the individual who must perpetually struggle and self-transcend to give his own life ultimate terminal meaning.
Always striving for the next peak. Now, let's contrast that relentless individual striving with the later German philosopher Martin Heidegger. He sought meaning not in individual conquest, but in a profound connection to collective being.
Heidegger starts with the seemingly arcane question, what does it mean to be itself?
Right.
He sought to define being, Dasein, which translates literally as being there, and he defined it not as a passive noun, but as an activity tied intimately to environment and temporality. He used two famous analogies to explain this.
The tool shed and the music.
Exactly. First, the analogy of the tool shed. For a hammer to be a hammer, it needs context nails, wood, a workbench, a builder. The being of the shed is tied to the collective set of objects and their relationship that give it meaning. Take away the nails or the context, and the hammer loses its essential function, its being.
And second is temporality. With music, you are only hearing the note playing right now.
But for the song to be meaningful, you have to remember the notes that came before and anticipate those coming after. The past and future are absolutely essential to the present being of the music.
So applied to humanity, Dasein is tied to context, to history, and to culture. You can't be you outside of your time and place.
Exactly. For you to be you, your Dasein is tied to your cultural and historical context, which forms the collective structure of your being. And this led Heidegger to a critical next step.
Which was?
When a society loses its shared history, its shared narratives, or its sense of continuity with the past, its collective Dasein is severely diminished. It loses its connection to being.
So Heidegger's vision was a way to restore the correct order of being. He saw Germany as a nation that had lost its proper attunement and required reconnection to its essential self.
And this is the philosophical intermediate step that leads to a deeply politicized application.
Right.
Precisely. In the context of National Socialism, this philosophical concept of being was tied directly to the state and the nation, the Volk as the vocal point of meaning.
The collective sense of self, history, and destiny. It all crystallized through the supreme leader and the state itself.
The idea of ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one empire, one leader, derived its immense meaning from connecting the individual back to the collective Dasein.
Framing the national state not just as a political entity, but as a metaphysical necessity for human existence.
And submission to that collective struggle was the only way to achieve true, authentic being.
So, where Nietzsche found the promised land in radical internal independence, Heidegger found it in radical collective dependence on history and statehood. Now let's turn to Julius Evola, the Italian fascist philosopher, who took this search for meaning directly to the battlefield, integrating both struggle and hierarchy.
Evola's philosophy was built on heroism and an extreme form of anti-materialism, particularly articulated in his Metaphysics of War. He argued that the modern, bourgeois, consumerist world is spiritually deadening.
It's too comfortable, too routine.
Exactly. War, therefore, is the opportunity to awaken the hero who sleeps within, breaking the routine of comfortable life and offering a transfiguring knowledge of life, life according to death.
The fundamental principle underlying his justification of conflict is heroism.
The moment the individual lives as a hero, even if it is the final moment of life, outweighs a protracted, monotonous existence devoted to wealth accumulation.
Evola viewed war as anti-materialist, then a way to affirm spiritual values.
Absolutely. War, in his view, reveals the relativity of human life and, therefore, the law of a more than life, giving it an essential spiritual value. Peace and materialism, conversely, sap a nation's vitality, leading men to sloth and weakness.
War forces the demonstration of supreme virtues like bravery and self-sacrifice. The struggle itself is the ultimate purification. But if the struggle is the only thing that matters, doesn't that make the outcome, the suffering, the death, the destruction of others, completely irrelevant? How do they justify that moral cost, especially when that struggle is inflicted upon others?
That is the essential ethical vacuum in this philosophy. From Evola's perspective, the moral cost of the suffering is secondary to the metaphysical gain achieved by the hero, the restoration of spiritual meaning, and the assertion of self-overcoming.
The meaning is found entirely in the process of the struggle,
which transcends mere material survival. The heroic act is self-justifying because it restores the correct state of being that materialism destroyed.
So Evola strived for a return to this correct state of being based on a true hierarchy,
where a spiritual elite is at the center. He believes societies naturally divide into castes: the slaves, material workers, the bourgeoisie, traders, and the warriors, rulers. The lives of the lower castes derive their ultimate meaning and supreme justification from reference to the spiritual principle maintained by the elite.
And when the center shifts to the servile or bourgeois caste, the state becomes distorted and unnatural.
Exactly. Thus, the war or the perpetual striving is required to maintain or restore the spiritual center and the true hierarchy of meaning. The ultimate turning point is the permanent restoration of the spiritual order. So we have established that the human mind is perpetually searching for an ultimate turning point or a collective apex. And when philosophy and religion provide these grand purposes, they inevitably spill out into the real world. They translate into collective geopolitical narratives aimed at generating purpose and, critically, avoiding internal societal collapse or existential dread.
Nations, like individuals, fear the silence that follows quest complete. History is just littered with nations that, upon achieving a major goal, immediately invent a new, larger mission to keep the engine of purpose running and the populace unified.
It's a repeating pattern.
The United States provides a clear and powerful example of this dynamic in the late 19th century. In the 1890s, the mission of Manifest Destiny, the task of conquering and settling the North American continent from coast to coast, was essentially complete.
The frontier is closed.
The frontier was closed. And what immediately followed was a period of severe economic stagnation, profound wealth inequality. The top 1% controlled a fortune greater than the remaining 99%, and a collective existential crisis.
The populace had achieved its promised land. And now what?
Right. The result was internal strife, class conflict, and the realization that the new world was starting to look too much like the impoverished old world it sought to escape.
The elites and intellectuals of the time, they understood the peril of a unified populace losing its sense of exceptionalism and shared tasks.
If the nation turned inward, it risked tearing itself apart over class divisions.
So the solution was to redefine the Promised Land and externalize the struggle. The new mission was defined not by territory, but by ideology, to spread liberal democracy across the globe.
And this new common task unified the populace.
And, crucially, diverted focus from severe internal economic problems. It replaced the geographical goal with a moral and political one.
The moment of realization came during the 1898 American-Spanish War. What started as this idealistic desire to spread freedom quickly morphed into full-blown imperialistic control.
It almost always does.
The U.S., for example, found itself establishing sovereignty over the Philippines. The idealism of helping was rapidly overshadowed by the necessity of imperial control, maintaining the common task to keep the nation cohesive and perpetually focused outward.
Pursuing this new global mission of salvation, the external struggle masked the internal glitch. And a remarkably similar narrative justified the expansion of the British Empire decades earlier in Africa. Britain experienced a genuine moral triumph with the abolition of slavery in 1833. Right?
But following this success, there was a void in moral purpose. The mission was completed. In the 1870s, as the scramble for Africa began, Britain needed a renewed moral imperative to justify aggression and expansion.
So the motivation was framed as
a genuine belief in a moral mission to bring civilization to Africa and combat the rampant local slavery that still existed among tribes and kingdoms. This mission provided the moral and psychological justification for imperial expansion.
So the goal was ostensibly humanitarian and enlightened a new grand purpose.
But it simultaneously served to justify the political aggression and control inherent in the colonization process. The need for a collective moral project was paramount.
And we saw this exact same savior complex manifest in Asia with the Japanese Empire. Japan was the only non-Western nation to successfully modernize and resist Western imperialism, which gave it a unique position and immense pride.
Which led to it taking on the mantle of the savior of Asia.
The fervor was intense. It was. Under the banner of the Greater Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, the narrative was that Japan would rescue nations from the clutches of the Western empires and unify them under an Asian power, thereby achieving a pan-Asian political and spiritual unity.
This was the ultimate regional turning point, promising liberation and dignity.
But despite the idealistic packaging, this holy mission resulted in nothing more than imposing a different, often harsher, colonial master on those Asian nations.
The mission, in all these cases, American, British, and Japanese, was required to fill an internal void.
Providing a unifying purpose that superseded immediate political critique or moral discomfort, it's an exercise in externalizing the existential angst.
In all three of these geopolitical examples, the American spreading of democracy, the British moral imperative, the Japanese savior complex, the goal was always a shining utopian tomorrow. A promised land that was just out there, waiting to be reached through collective action and struggle.
And that is the synthesis. The perennial psychological need for transcendence and a final destination is projected onto collective tasks. The mission itself, even when rooted in idealism, often masked or necessitated imperialistic control or political aggression. These geopolitical missions were existential answers to internal societal anxieties, designed to keep the populace moving toward an ultimate turning point that never quite arrives.
And where is the apex today?
We see this perennial psychological need projected onto technology, which promises a turning point that surpasses biology itself. AI, terraforming Mars, and merging human and machine consciousness are the new narratives carrying the promise of ultimate meaning and transcendence.
They are the secular technological promised lands.
They promise a final, ultimate turning point for humanity as a whole, a singularity or an omega point that completes the human project and finally brings the striving to a close. But as history shows, the moment of arrival only clears the ground for the next, even bigger mission.
We've completed a massive deep dive, moving from the specific sting of personal existential emptiness, that 3.00 a.m. realization that the credits are rolling, to the grand sweep of a global mission. We have seen that the human mind is hardwired for a terminal goal, an ultimate turning point, and that when traditional religion, philosophy, or even games fail to provide this end, we invent new missions.
We do.
We've seen the craving manifest in the secular struggle of self-optimization, treating life as a gamified path to personal salvation. We traced the cosmic unity sought in Hegel's Geist and Teilhard's Omega Point. We explored the passionate, active service of Solovyev's godmanhood and the dark transcendence sought by Nietzsche's will to power and Evola's metaphysics of war. And we concluded with how these philosophical drives translate into national purpose, generating missions to conquer new territories or save the world, all to avoid the terrifying silence of having nowhere left to go.
And that cycle is the most important takeaway. The promise of fulfillment, whether found in godmanhood, the Omega Point, the Overman, or the technological singularity, is always about achieving completion the moment the credits roll. But our experience repeatedly shows that the intense meaning is not found in the moment of arrival, which inevitably leaves us hollow. The meaning is found in the purposeful struggle, the hundreds of hours, the sweat, the focus, the political action to reach the promised land. The moment we summit forces the search for the next, bigger mission. The most persistent, beautiful, and terrifying thing about humanity is not the destinations we imagine, but the unkillable fire that makes us immediately start building the next peak after summiting the last one.